My name is Lori, and we are at the Prairie Renaissance Cultural Alliance in Morris, Minnesota. And we are here with Calvin deRuyter from Evansville, Minnesota. And he is a painter. And without further ado, we would like to hear from you, Calvin, about your process and your artwork, and maybe about a few of the paintings that you have here.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody who came. I don't have anything prepared, so you are going to hear just the thoughts flowing out of my mouth. I'm going to start, I guess, with how I got here. How did I get to this place where I'm doing abstracts? I graduated with a degree in fine art from Hamline University as a painter, but as a real painter, because I was painting oil, and with a minor in drawing. And I then proceeded the next year to purchase a newspaper, go into business, and not pick up a brush for 25 years. And so about 25 years in, a friend that I knew from college named Lynn Middleton Fuller, she called me up and basically said, Calvin, this business is driving you crazy. You need to step back. And it was kind of like, oh, I had to listen, because at one point she and her husband were employees of mine. So they knew how I was at business. And she just said, yeah. She said, this has got to stop. We got to do some art. We're going to take a watercolor class. And I said, what? Watercolor? Why would we do watercolor? And she said, well, because that's what the class is. I said, okay, logical. And so there was a class out of the Como Park Conservatory. And so we went to the class, and I hated it. And we took a second class, and I hated it even more. And so then we stopped taking classes, and I would go to her house, and her husband is a cordon bleu chef, trained chef. And so it was a win-win, because I could paint, I would have communication with people, and at the same time I would get a cordon bleu meal. And so it was a good trade-off. We started taking a couple workshops, and I took a workshop from a man named Skip Lawrence, who recently, just in the last year, has passed, unfortunately. And it was a 5-day workshop, and he was the second day, was going around and talking to everybody. And I was at the end of the row, so I was the last one. And he came and he said, you're not having any fun at this, are you? I said, no, not really. He says, why are you here? And I pointed to Lynn, who was at the next table, and said, it's her fault. She dragged me here. He said, well, why don't you like it? And I said, I hate watercolor. I hate all the rules of watercolor. I hate the fact that they want you to leave the white of the paper, that you have to put colors on in a certain way, that you can't mix the way you want to mix them. There's all these rules. And he said, are you trying to make a living at it? Painting? Laughing, I said, you've got to be kidding. And he said, well, then what do you care? What do you care what the rules are? So he said, the next 3 days, you have to come to my lectures in the morning, or my demonstrations. But the rest of the day, I want to see you just have fun. I don't care how you do it. I don't care what you do. I don't care how you paint. I don't care what materials you use. I just want to see you have fun for 3 days. That's your assignment for the week. And I thought afterward, I graduated with a degree in fine art. I really shouldn't have needed permission to enjoy the process or to experiment. But that was the permission. And so the next morning, I came in and I thought, okay, I'm just going to start putting watercolor on the paper, and I'm going to start scraping it. I'm going to start mixing it. And there was born the technique of my landscapes for the next 12 to 15 years. It was an enjoyable process. It was a lot of fun. I was doing teaching, I was winning awards. And part of the process is I never believed I could do an abstract. I tried to do abstract, and for somehow they always turned out to be landscapes. And I felt like I loved looking at them. I loved looking at other artists' abstract, but I couldn't believe that I could somehow do them myself. And so, but after you've done your 500th landscape, and you're trying to think of that 500th title to go with the landscape, it's kind of like, okay, Calvin, you gotta push yourself here. You gotta do something a little bit outside of what you're here in the box you're in. So the way I approached it, I did try and it didn't work. But the way I then approached it was I took an already existing landscape that I had painted, and I would start anew, and I would break down the shapes, and I would break down the colors, and I, in my mind, rearranged them and moved them around the canvas into different parts. And I did that for probably about a half or 3/4 of a year, just to break my mind from that idea that landscapes had to look a certain way. And that was kind of the transition step that came about so that I could move into doing abstracts. Of this show, 16, I think there are 28 pieces in here. 16 of these pieces have been done in the last 13 months. And some specifically for this show and for specific places in the show, such as on the short walls here. And I had never seen them hung. I mean, I had never seen them hung. Those 16 paintings had never even hung in my own studio. So this was an experience even seeing it myself. And as they will tell you, the people who helped hang it, I was watching and I'm kind of covering my eyes and I'm kind of going, okay. And, and they do such a wonderful job here. They're in there with, believe me, if you come to my studio, this is not going to happen. They're there with levels, leveling the various, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, okay. This is a totally new experience to see them all together. And at the end, I made some comment about, is it too much? Do I have to remove something? And two of them kind of looked at me like I had somehow lost my mind in the 3 hours that they were doing it. And I think it was Jenny who said, no, it's immersive. And I said, oh, okay, I'll take immersive. We'll go with that. That I will take. So it probably might be a little bit overwhelming, but I do think it's immersive. And it is very reflective of, I should say that when I painted landscapes, my ideal landscapes were, I wanted to capture the air. I wanted to capture the atmosphere. I wanted to capture the feeling of a warm, muggy day on your skin. I wanted to feel the cold air as it hit your face. My dream was to capture the air. And I come to think of that as the expression of my outer spiritual. And then when I was doing abstracts, I thought, okay, now how does this connect? You are now seeing my inner spiritual. You're seeing my inner synapses and how they're moving together and how they're connecting. My parents, if they were still living, would probably think I'm schizophrenic, but I've been having a lot of fun exploring. They have moved. You may notice a difference between the 16 and some of the ones that were come before, because in the last year, I've begun to explore the concept of organic shapes and how man tries to control his environment. So how does man do that? We make straight roads. We put up a straight line of telephone poles. Heaven forbid we plant trees and we plant them in rows. We somehow try to organize and make them into certain shapes or certain geometric shapes or certain lines. And so a lot of the work that has lines and shape in it is my trying to understand how is man interconnecting? How is that manual part of our footprint on the environment? How is that intersecting with what's really out there, which is a wonderful, wild, beautiful world? And so that is the later work and is probably a connection to a lot of the lines that you see and a lot of the textures, which is trying to give a feeling of the organic shapes and the organic colors that we have in our world. And so I think I certainly have had influences. I would encourage all of you that the long piece here on the wall, in fact, someone saw that was on the promo piece I was handing out at the studio tour this weekend. And someone said, "Oh my, you've been influenced by Brian Rutenberg." And I was like, "Yeah, how did, really? Okay." I've only watched about 45 of his videos. So I'm assuming that probably I have some influence from him. But if you yourself are an artist, I would encourage you to go to his YouTube channel. And I think he currently has about 87 videos over the last number of years. And start at number one and just, he is philosophical. He's in some parts a little bit, you can't be too sensitive as an artist or be too sensitive about words used sometimes. But he has a wonderful philosophy about art and how we should approach art as artists. And, you know, and he'll pull in, of course, vignettes about his life. He's a New York artist and about how he got there and his being raised in South Carolina, somewhere in the South, and how that has affected his work and so on. So I encourage you to do that. So I'm not saying that I don't have, apparently I do have influences from some other people that I have been watching, but I think that it is very much I feel much more authentic in doing my abstracts. Landscapes are wonderful. It's how I sold and how I got into galleries and how I got awards. And so I'm very grateful to it. But the truth is, if you put in a horizon line and you put in something else, somebody's going to recognize it as a landscape, and somehow in the world there is a person that's going to connect to it. You know, the abstracts for me take anywhere from 4 to 10 times longer to do an abstract than it took to do a landscape. Because there, for me, it's really a matter of exploring how do shapes work, how do colors work, how are those things interrelated. And then especially when I was starting to work with line, you know, I think the first reaction from my spouse when he saw it was kind of like it was out of place. And because it wasn't, I mean, if you would have told me 3 years ago that I would have been focused on geometric shapes, I would have told you were crazy, because there was just no way it was going to happen. You know, the world is all about organic shapes. Why would I put in geometric shapes? The most geometric shape I ever put in was probably a barn, and even there I tried to distort it in some way. So this is kind of you're kind of seeing a new phase of I've only been focused on the abstracts for about 5 years. Before that, it was strictly landscapes. So I guess I'll open up for questions if you have any questions about anything. I may not answer it, and if I don't know the answer, I may make up something, but I will try to answer it. Yeah.
Because these are really non-representational.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, this is just kind of a funny question. Are you ever painting one and for some reason you turn it maybe 90 degrees, another 90, another 90?
It isn't.
Or is it always how do you start?
No, that's not a funny question at all. Oh. They get turned constantly as I'm doing them. Yes, because you see something totally different.
Yeah.
As you turn it, so you know something that you may not have all even thought of. You turn it, 90 or 180 degrees, and all of a sudden something pops out at you, and then you have to decide, okay, from this direction something's popping out. Do I want to keep that? Do I want to cover it up, or do I want to exploit it? So yeah, it's very much of a process of turning it around. I would say that probably but there probably is about 10% where actually I will turn it and go, okay, is this making a better statement this way or this way or this way? I'll actually try to figure out, which way is best trying to express what I was thinking while I was doing the work. So it's not a silly question.
I think, well, I wonder if somebody takes one home, of course, you don't know what they're going to do.
Right. Well, the signature is in a certain spot.
Oh, no.
Which I hate signatures. I wish we could do away with signatures altogether. I hate them. I think they're distracting.
I don't agree.
And but the galleries insist on it. So, you really don't have a choice. The only one this one is signed on the side, the big one, because I just could not force myself to put the signature in that lower right corner. So, but all the rest are pretty much tend to be signed on the right, in the lower portion. So, any other questions?
So this form,
I almost always start with automatic drawing. So I start with I use water soluble graphite, and then I use also white and black gesso. Now often nothing survives that automatic drawing in the end, but that is almost always how I start an abstract, because I just need to feel like I need to free my mind. I need to get in the flow. I need to that kind of is a stupid line. And then I'll take some black gesso or white gesso and I'll cover it up. And then I'll do some more drawing and then I'll cover it up. So I think in answer to the question, it is certainly mainly organic, the work I do, but at a certain point, you have to make a decision. You can't get all the way to the end without thinking about it. I mean, the reason abstracts take so much longer is because it's a much more intellectual process than landscape. And out of about 12 or 15 prints that I are worthy of any further. And my friend Lynn, who was there for the tour weekend visiting, said, "Oh, you can use them as collage paper." And I looked at her and I said, "Don't start throwing another thing at me. I don't do collage. So, hey, go to work." So she says, "Well, now you're going to have to, because you're going to have all this collage paper. You're going to have to do something." And that is, I mean, I'm sure that people that do jelly printing develop a sense of organization and how to, but for me, it was just kind of like, didn't have a clue what I was going to end up with at the end. And that's very different from these abstracts. So somewhere along the line, I have to figure out. Most times I have a color idea in my head when I start. That at least I might say, okay, I want to do something primarily blue, or I want to do something primarily in warm colors, or I want to do a conflict between warm and cold and see where it leads or where it heads. So I would say that that generally takes precedence over form. It's usually the color idea that I'm starting with, and the form, it tends to be a little bit more of an intellectual process of pulling forms out of that, those shapes that I got when I did automatic drawing.
Painting with what, like the two that are there and there.
On the ends? Yeah.
Okay, so are you painting with a brush or are you painting, how are you doing it?
I currently work with brushes. Well, and I do ink, so I do pouring. I work with all kinds of tools to kind of move ink and paint around. So there's no real, I mean, obviously this one right around the corner here, that's primarily a poured piece. Okay. So, and you can kind of see that that's, you know, that was where the whole thing started and where it ended. Well, it didn't end that way because I put in the geometric lines, but I didn't go beyond that in developing and painting further. The others are where they're more painterly. Yeah, you get to a process that you have to make certain decisions about how you're gonna.
Those two on those sides have like these, like the one has white, I think.
Yeah.
And
white and black, yeah.
Yeah, and so those are the lines that I was just kind of curious about.
Yes, and those are usually done with either a brush or from a paint pen that I have filled up, a refillable pen with a, and since those are big lines, with a big nib on a refillable pen, and I can use, you primarily use either black or white. And so I believe that both of those were done with a pen. And because of course, for me, it becomes much more fluid than the brush. Because the brush, you have to kind of worry about, do I have enough paint? Do I have enough paint in this brush to actually make the stroke? You know, so as I'm ending it, as I'm thinking about the process, using the ink pens with acrylic ink, well, that's just an easier process for me.
Yeah, I'm not a painter. Obviously.
Oh, you're a printmaker. I should come to you for jelly printing. You do jelly printing?
That's true.
Yeah. Okay. Any other? Yeah.
So I know that I think a lot of people, it's knowing when you're done.
Oh.
Yeah. How do you feel or know when you're done?
Right. I'm going to paraphrase Brian Rutenberg. I hate when people ask that question. Nobody asks a baker when he's done baking. Okay, he has a product. No, you know, people taste it. It's either good or bad, but nobody asked him, "How did you know when your cake was done?" Okay. So why do people ask when the work is done? But now, being more realistic, the answer is it's tough. Of all the students over the years that I've taught, that's probably the #1 mistake, because they carry things too far. It's not that they stop too soon. It's that they go way over. And I, years ago, came up with a process that if I get to a point where I think it's approaching a complete phase, I will stop and I will put it up and I have to look at it. And I don't go back in there unless I can absolutely say, this absolutely needs me to go back in. So my philosophy, if you think it's 80% done, stop, explore, look at it, see how you're feeling about it, but don't go in unless you really think it needs something. And that kind of stops you from the overworking issue. And I try to kind of live by that rule. And the other thing is, especially when I was doing teaching landscapes, you know, people who said, well, I want to learn your use of color. And it's kind of like, well, I can tell you how I use color and I think about it, but that's not going to be you. We all have our own color sense. We all, I mean, we're either tend toward cool paints or we tend to the warm paints, and we all have a sense of what we think of our own and what is finished or what is a complete. I do like, even though I've been a rule breaker for my entire career, I do like the idea of 80-20. That if your strongest paintings, if you are 80% of one thing, then 20% of something else. So that could be 80% of warm colors, 20% of cool, or it could be 80% of organic versus 20% of geometric. It could be 80% of a certain kind of line and 20% of another different kind. I mean, so there are a lot of ways to approach that. But I do think there's some truth in that 80-20 concept, because that gives us an interesting juxtaposition between what's happening inside of a painting.
Calvin, I think we could listen to you all evening.
Okay.
I think this is he's right. I want to thank you so much for exhibiting with us. As you say, it is an immersive experience. So hoping lots of folks can come and experience this. We are up through September 7th.
Spread the word.
Spread the word. Come on down and visit this exhibit. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah.